Music can, for example, provide pleasure. It can alleviate pain. It can make us happy. It can touch us. It can move us. It can evoke memories, emotional memories. Music can evoke nostalgia. Music can help us overcome negative thoughts and thought loops, like feelings of guilt, rumination, and so forth.
Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. I'm joined on this episode by Professor Stefan Koelsch and we talk about the neuroscience of music. He's a neuroscientist who researches how music influences the brain and vice versa. And we had a really fascinating talk. I started off the conversation by talking about a moment I experienced when I was 15 or 16 and I was on a bus coming back from some sort of high school function where we'd had a sleepover and it was late at night and I was listening to one of my favorite CDs by the Counting Crows and how I remember it transported me somewhere. It took me to this different place emotionally, and ever since then I've been cognizant of those moments where music really does transport me somewhere else. In this conversation we talk about how we can kind of tap into that feeling that I experienced when I was a kid and I've experienced several times since, and what we can learn about music, how it fits into our daily lives, what's actually going on inside of our brains. So I hope you enjoyed this episode about the neuroscience of music. Stefan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, Zale, and all listeners. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I was saying at the beginning, I was very, very concerned about pronouncing your name properly, and I probably did not pronounce it fully properly, but you said my pronunciation was acceptable.
Absolutely. Stefan Koelsch, but I know it's almost impossible to say it like that for a native English speaker. It's no problem.
So, Stefan, I'm wondering if what I just said in that introduction resonates with you at all. And I imagine to some extent it does, because you wrote this book, this incredible book, Good Vibrations, Unlocking the Healing Power of Music. And when I heard about this book and I was introduced to you, I was really excited about it because it immediately piqued my interest and it connected to me on some level of, music for me, not all the time, but in certain settings, is able to kind of unlock this great feeling in me. Is that something that you'd personally experienced that you wanted to look into more? And I know the book looks into a lot of different elements of music, not just that, but that's one facet of it.
Yeah, the episode you described, an intense emotional moment that made you feel more positive than before, is something that almost everybody knows. Not everybody, but almost everybody. And our mood, our emotions getting more positive with music is one of the most important and most profound healing effects of music. I know it sounds trivial, music lifts our spirits and that is healthy for us, but there are a number of secrets and maybe some of them we will be able to cover on this podcast.
You're a neuroscientist, you're a psychologist, you have the skills and the knowledge base to look at music and how it affects us from various angles, which is what you do in the book. Can you give a brief explanation just of sound waves and how they interact with the brain and can affect emotions on a physiological level? Before we even get into music specifically, because sound waves obviously is the core of what music is.
Of course, yes. When I said music lifts our spirits, music influences our emotions and moods, it sounds very trivial, but it's very important for our healing effects, then now we can refine it a little, because it happens on different levels in the brain. So, of course, in the inner ear, the sound waves are transformed into neural signals, and these then travel first through a part of the brain that is called the brainstem. And in that part of the brain, the sound waves and music, speech, but also other sounds, of course, can elicit the first bodily responses to music. For example, a loud sound can make us startle. It can influence our heart rate, our breathing rate, our pupil width. And these responses to sounds also happen simply when we listen to music. This is how music, for example, already on the level of the brainstem, can motivate us, vitalize us, or on the other hand, calm us down. And on other levels of the emotional systems in the brain, music can, for example, provide pleasure. It can alleviate pain. It can make us happy. It can touch us. It can move us. It can evoke memories, emotional memories. Listening to the song that you described before, simply listening to it probably will elicit some of the emotional flavors that you had back then. Music can evoke nostalgia. Music can help us overcome negative thoughts and thought loops, like feelings of guilt, rumination, and so forth.
So there is a neural basis, though, to what you're talking about. And I mean, as I say that, I realize, of course there is, because there's a neural basis to pretty much everything in our lives in terms of how we think, how we feel. There is a neural basis that is controlling that. But you said some people could look at it as trivial, but I think when you actually describe the science behind it, that makes it feel a little bit less trivial and a little bit more real and something that people can more actively think about and tap into.
Yeah, about 25 years ago, I wanted to do the first fMRI study on music and emotions.
And for those who don't know, functional MRI, fMRI is a functional MRI, which can actually show what is going on in the brain and which areas are active when the MRI is being done.
So when I proposed this study to my professors at the Max Planck Institute back then, they asked me, well, what are you expecting to happen in the brain? It's only music. It's not a lion or another dangerous animal. We can't eat it. We can't buy anything with it. We can't have sex with it. So why do you expect to happen anything in the brain? And I told them back then, well, when I have emotional responses to music, it can go along with goosebumps, sometimes with tears. I feel the tension in my body. There must be correlates deep inside the brain that are mediating these effects. And lo and behold, when we did this study, we actually found many emotion structures deep in the brain being activated in response to pleasant or to unpleasant music. So the view from back then that music can't really, change activity deep in our brain, in our, deep emotional brain structures, has been revolutionized during the last years. And now we have evidence from dozens of brain imaging studies that music can indeed change activity in each and every emotion structure in our brain. And this is also important for the therapeutic effects of music, because many problems, many disorders, many diseases go hand in hand with some disbalance in emotional structures in the brain. And the promise is that when we can use music to balance out these what's imbalanced in the brain, we can achieve therapeutic effects with music.
So a couple follow-up questions there. When you say that you're seeing on fMRI and a lot of these imaging studies that there's been changes to the brain, are you talking about in the limbic system? Which areas in the brain in particular are being triggered where you're seeing more neuronal activity?
Yes, you mentioned already the limbic system. That is one of the systems that can be activated by music. The limbic system, with structures that some might have heard of, such as the amygdala or the hippocampus. These are structures that are involved, for example, in the so-called fight and flight responses, but also in pleasure, also in happiness, in social bonding, in memory. And in addition to these core structures of emotional processing in the brain, there are also other emotional structures in the brain. Some might have heard of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the cingulate cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, all important emotion structures in the brain, which can be changed in their activity when we listen to music, when we engage in music, when we dance, when we make music ourselves.
When you talk about changes and how it can cause changes, my example of me sitting on a bus listening to a song, that's great. I felt something for a couple minutes. But more profound or more important would be how can it change people long term? And do you see, or is there any research that looks into okay, you have that experience, and then it actually causes the neurons to change a little bit. The concept of neuroplasticity, how your nerves are malleable and can create new connections. So I guess what I'm asking is, beyond the experience where you just play music and you see that in the brain there is activity, in the future, are you able to look back and say, okay, this person has listened to a lot of music, their neurons have been creating new connections, and their brain actually looks different somehow months or years later because they've used music intentionally to change their brains?
Well, when people make music, play a musical instrument, learn a musical instrument over years and years and years and years, tens of thousands of hours, then new neural connections form in the brain. And in certain areas of the brain, you can actually see this with the naked eye. So, for example, the so-called corpus callosum, which is the structure through which the axons, the connections between neurons from between the two hemispheres pass, is thicker in musicians than in non-musicians. Also, the auditory cortex is a little bit larger. Many studies have used musicians as a model to study how the brain changes when we learn something as a result of long-term intense training. But we must not forget that this is just a model, meaning that no matter what we do in our lives, our brain learns, and our neurons, the anatomy of our brain, adapts accordingly, meaning that neural pathways are formed when we engage in certain tasks. So, for example, when we engage in emotion regulation, emotion management, and meditation, then new pathways grow in the brain that facilitate regulating and managing our emotions, that facilitate being in charge of our moods and of our emotions, and that facilitate the process of becoming, more mindful, gain more inner peace. And every time we engage in such activity, new neural connections are formed, new neural pathways are formed, and it makes it easier next time to engage in the same task.
It's fascinating. And I mean, that study that shows thicker corpus callosums in musicians is so interesting. And when you mention mindfulness there, I think the reason I want to spend a little bit of time like we've been doing on the science and the actual neurons is because, for me at least, I know when I do things like meditation, without music even, it's hard for me to really envision that it's doing anything, I might be doing it and I'll think, I don't know, maybe I felt something, maybe I didn't. You're told by people, just keep on practicing, it is doing something. And to hear that scientifically there is structural changes going on in your brain, I think that is encouraging to people and validating to people about some of the exercises they're doing that they might view as trivial, or they might view as not having an impact that they thought they're really having. And for me, at least, understanding that no, there is structural biological changes going on, that's a motivator for me.
Well, you might be surprised how much is actually changing. In my book, I try to make an approximation of a calculation about how many new connections between neurons, we call it synapses, are formed every hour we fully engage with in a task. And it's probably around 30 million new connections
In
in
one
hour. In
oh
1
my
hour.
gosh.
So, yes. And of course, these connections might vanish again if we never do this kind of task again. But if we do a similar hour later that day or the next day, and then another one the next day, and then another one the next day, then the repeated use of these connections leads to these connections becoming more and more stable. And that's why, for example, for our mental well-being, it's important not to only take care of it in moments of crises, but to train it, to train our mental resilience like a muscle, where we also need repeated and regular physical activity to keep them strong. And for our mental resilience and for our mental health, it's the same thing. We need to engage repeatedly and, many times every day in such things as, emotion regulation, focused attention, etc., to keep these processes strong and going. And these can be small things. So, for example, realizing in a situation that typically evokes anger, to view the situation from another perspective and say, okay, it makes me angry because it happened again, but in the larger perspective, it's maybe not as important as I think it actually is. Maybe I can deal with it in another way than getting angry, because getting angry about something is usually not really helpful, neither for the cause, not for myself. It's just one example. It can also be feeling demotivated, discouraged, depressed, etc. Moments where I realize, there are these negative thought loops again, these repetitive, intrusive, negative thoughts, and realizing this and then interrupting them. For example, with music, and we can use music very effectively to interrupt these negative thoughts. And in my book, I also explain the best recipes for this. And every time we achieve this, it's one of the most, one of the greatest personal successes that we can actually achieve in life. It's these small things. Once we tackle them and overcome them, it's a success. It's worthy of a celebration, and is utterly, it's hugely beneficial for our health and our resilience. And when we train it with these small things in life, we become better equipped to deal with the huge crisis that sooner or later we have to face in our lives.
When you look at something like mindfulness and meditation, are the pathways that are activated similar to the ones that are activated when someone listens to a certain type of music?
It depends on the type of listening, but the type of meditation that you mentioned, the attention-focused meditation, basically means that we engage with our attention in something over a certain period of time without letting our minds wander, especially without letting our minds wander into negative territories. And we can do this with music, or we can do this without music. I like to do it while I play music. And it's very easy. I do my violin exercises, and instead of looking and getting angry about wrong notes, I stay focused and concentrated and enjoy the many correct notes that I play. As a music student, I made my music studies for myself to hell, because back then I practiced mostly with stress and negative thoughts like, it's still not good enough. There are these mistakes again. You're not progressing fast enough. There are these others that are still better than you. It'll be very difficult, impossible. You will never reach it to get the job that you want, etc., etc. All these negative thoughts were circling in my brain. And I wish somebody had told me back then what I'm going to tell you now. There is another way. There's another way of practicing your instrument, and by extension, another way to lead your life. And that is, realize these negative thoughts and then, letting them pass as quickly as possible, because they are just thoughts. And then concentrate on what you actually want to do. Like enjoy the sound. Practice the scale, feel the sensory motor activity that you have in your fingers and your arms. Like really focus on your task instead of circling negative, intrusive, repetitive thoughts. And that in itself is a kind of meditation. When practicing a musical instrument like that, or when working on an essay, or preparing for an exam, or doing sports, or working on a podcast like that, it becomes a meditation. It becomes an attention-focused meditation, and that is something that is good for you, that is good for your mental health. And now if you allow me, I'll give you a very quick recipe on how to use music to disrupt negative thoughts and thought loops and turn the situation, at least for a few minutes, into an attention-focused meditation. and that is, have a playlist ready with songs that sound like the mood that you want to get into. Not only like the mood you're currently in, but like the mood you want to get into. Some, positive sounding music. For example, joyful or motivating or relaxing and calming. It should be music with a beat so that you can tap along with it, or so that you can breathe along with it. And while you do this, focus your attention on the music, and that's once you start tapping to the music or counting the beats while you breathe in and out with synchrony to the music, your mind is engaged in that task. And as long as your mind is engaged in this task, there will be no resources left for intrusive negative thoughts. And that will also help negative emotions and moods pass by. So if you let your mind have these few minutes of emotional timeout, it will calm the mind down. It will help the emotion systems in the brain get some air again, start breathing again, and let's say, regenerating again. And it will help making your lives overall more positive. It sounds trivial, but it's just using music in a way of an attention-focused meditation, a few minutes here and there to, let's say, foster inner resilience, inner calm, and inner peacefulness.
And when you're giving this advice and talking about this, are you referring to a separate activity, not while you're doing something else to try and focus you, but rather take a few minutes, take 10 minutes, and some people say they'll meditate or they'll do their mindfulness. You're saying you could just do this instead, or you could do this as part of that. You're not saying do this while you're doing another task to focus. Are you saying do this in a separate time period in order to kind of focus yourself, ground yourself, create these neural connections, and then go back to what you were doing?
Yeah, mainly do it separately. But, so for example, many people are plagued by intrusive, repetitive negative thoughts, for example, when they cycle to the university or to their job. And in that case, it's fine to turn on, a song that you have, let's say, in your head, like start, switching on your inner radio if you don't have headphones with you. Your go-to song, I have one, and I recommend everybody to have one. Switch it on, with in your inner head, and cycle in synchrony with that song, or breathe in synchrony with that song. Engage in singing the song with your inner voice. That already will switch off the resources that you devoted before to the negative thoughts and thought loops. Let's say if you're preparing for an exam, it might be very difficult to say, okay, I'm going to concentrate now without any negative thoughts. I'm going to turn my exam preparation into a meditation by following Dr. Koelsch's recipe and, not engaging in negative thought loops, but just focusing on my task step by step. For some, that's very difficult and challenging. So for them, it might be better to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to take my headphones and my MP3 player or my smartphone, put on my go-to song or some other song that I really like, and engage in a 5-minute music meditation, and afterwards I'll be better equipped to continue with my work. That's perfectly fine. I don't think it's very useful to start continuing to prepare for your exam and at the same time do the music exercise. In fact, it won't be possible, because the whole purpose of the music meditation is to attract mental resources onto the music and onto engaging into the music, so that they cannot be devoted to negative thoughts, feelings of guilt, negative moods, etc.
You talk in your book about different types of music, and you already alluded to that depending on what kind of mood you want to be in or what kind of part of your brain you want to train, but you refer to different rhythms, tempos, and harmonies in order to regulate different feelings and emotions. I'm curious if you could, because I'm already thinking like, okay, great, what playlist do I want to create? Because that sounds like a great idea. I've struggled with meditation. I know it's good. I know for my mind in particularly, I could use that because I have OCD, which I've spoken about on this show before, and I could certainly benefit from some sort of mindfulness, but I find it hard. And I'm already thinking, wow, music would be great if I used it more consciously and with more intention in my life. In terms of choosing the songs and the playlist, when you think of rhythm, tempo, and harmony, are there specific genres that you recommend for certain moods? Some people might listen to symphonies. Some people might say, I want lyrics. Some people probably don't really know where to start. Do you have any advice on what kind of genres work best for certain mood states and mind states?
Yeah, well, fortunately, that really depends on personal preference and personal tastes. So for somebody, symphonies might work. For the next person, it might be heavy metal. So that's all fine. It's important how the music affects you personally. The second thing that's important is for which kind of mood regulation do you want to use the music. So for example, when you want to energize yourself in the morning, when you want to get up and motivate yourself for the day, then you probably want music that, for example, is groovy, that makes you move somehow, that makes you kind of feel vitalized. And that is typically music that has a slightly faster beat and is, for example, suited to dance, let's say. Not necessarily. People that are more into classical music, might prefer other types, like an uplifting Bach cantata or maybe, a heroic final movement of a Beethoven symphony or so. Yeah. When you want to calm down yourself during the day because stressful episode, or in the evening because you want to find some sleep, or because you want to calm down somebody else, that can be a baby or a child, for example, then you probably want to use different music, namely music that you perceive as relaxing and calming. And that is typically music that has a slower tempo and maybe is even a bit more repetitive, a bit more boring. When you want to fall asleep can be helpful. When you just want to relax, you might also want to have something that sounds calm and peaceful, but is still interesting enough for you to somehow engage mentally in it. So for example, if you want to use it for a meditation that calms you down, you want to probably use some music that still has a beat so that you can breathe in and breathe out in synchrony to the music and maybe, count the beats while you're doing it. So it really depends on what you want to achieve there.
For curating this playlist, just from a very practical standpoint, for people who are listening to this and saying, yeah, this sounds great. Like Spotify obviously has a lot of playlists. Apple has a lot of playlists. Are there other sources of where you would recommend people go? Because I've tried to create my own playlist, obviously, but I imagine that they're suboptimal. Even if I'm trying to achieve a certain vibe, it's tough to create a certain vibe.
Yeah, in my book, I give a lot of tips about how to curate and assemble a playlist, also for different, maybe mental conditions, for different purposes. I give you one example. If somebody has problems with depressed mood or depression, then it's probably helpful, especially when you want to use your playlist to get out of negative mood, to start with music that sounds like the mood you're typically in when you're in the bad mood. And that can be very different for very different people. It's important, however, to assemble a playlist such that after 1 or 2 or 3 pieces, the sound of the music makes a transition in that it sounds more like the music, that the music sounds more like the mood that you want to get into. So, for example, more peaceful or more joyful or more motivating. Many people with depression listen a lot to music, but they are stuck in listening to their negative sounding music, and that actually drags them down, and that actually keeps the negative spiral going instead of getting them out of the negative mood. So that here you can see it's a very personal thing, because another person might say, well, when I am in a bad mood, I actually like to listen to positive sounding music right away because that works best for me. That gets me out of my negative mood most quickly. And others say, well, when I'm in a bad mood, like after a breakup or something other that happened, I like to listen to this and this song because it helps me vent. I can cry myself out really nicely, and then it's all right, and I continue with more positive sounding music because then, it's I've vented and I would like to, get in a positive mood with positive sounding music. So that's why it's very difficult to make playlists that is like one fits all, yeah, and often you need more specialized approaches. But having said that, in my book I also provide a lot of examples of songs that can be used for, let's say, motivating playlists, such as dance music from the last 100 years, from different genres and styles, so that everybody can find examples about what kind of music might be worth a try.
That's really, really great advice. And of course, it's customizable to each person. I like how you kind of, in that first example of the person who's depressed, I mean, again, it varies per person. Some people who are depressed might say, I just want to go straight into the positive. But your initial approach that you outlined was kind of, to me, it sounded like meet them where they're at, right? If you're a little bit depressed and in a melancholic state, probably helps to start off with something that fits the mood that you're in.
Absolutely.
As opposed to forcing you to say, be happy. And then gradually, you can kind of transition out of that. And like you said, it's going to vary per person, but that resonates with me. I feel like if I were in a sad state, sometimes people say, just cheer up, be happy, right?
That doesn't work at all.
It doesn't work at all, because people need to meet you where you are, in the music in this case.
Exactly. You want to feel understood, and you want to be picked up in your state.
A lot of people listen to music in group settings, and you talk about the power of social connectivity that music can bring out in your book. One way that a lot of people listen to music is at raves. And I'm curious your take on what's going on at a rave and why music can be such a transformative experience there.
Yeah, well, what really binds us humans together is synchronization. So synchronization of emotions, of attention, of our sensory motor activity, of movements. When we do things together, it binds us together, especially when we do it together in time. When children talk to you and say, here, look there, have you seen this? Look over there. What they want is they want to share attention with you. They want to engage in the same thing together with you, because that bonds. All they want to do in this situation is make a social connection. And when we make music together, when we sing together, when we dance together, when we move together to music, we engage in this kind of synchronization, and that binds us together. That makes us into a group. I'm not a single actor anymore. I act in a group. I become part of the group. And that is something that we humans find not only very pleasurable, this is what can make us happy. And we are born with the capacity to synchronize our movements together to a pulse, like we do with music. No other species can do that. And we humans are capable of doing this from a very early age on. So children at the age of 3, 4, 5 months already start moving to music. They're not very good at it. You need scientific instruments to show that it's above chance what they do there, but they can. They start learning it. And when they synchronize their movements to music, they smile. You can see this in video footage of these experiments, showing us that we like this kind of synchronization to music. We like dancing and moving and raving together. We like swinging together in a club as part of a tribe, because then we belong. And this feeling of belonging is a deep human need. And with music, we can instantly fulfill this need in large groups and, in the blink of an eye. I can say, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the stadium, and then people clap and, sing a song or vocalize with me. And suddenly we're all part of something bigger.
Drugs is obviously a big part in raves. Not all raves, but a lot of people take drugs to experience music in certain ways, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's MDMA, whether it's cannabis. A lot of people feel like that enhances the way they can experience music. I wonder if you could speak to that a bit. And obviously there's the preface here that obviously drugs can be very dangerous, and we know that, and especially at raves it can cause dehydration and death if you're taking ecstasy. So nobody's recommending that on this podcast, but the reality is a lot of people do certain drugs when they're listening to music, whether on their own or whether they're at raves, and they do feel like it kind of enhances everything you've spoken about. What's your take on that from, I guess, a biological perspective? If the drugs are doing something to kind of increase neuronal activity that meshes well with the neuronal activity that's already being induced by the music.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on drugs and also not really on music and drugs. I know that there have been some investigations into psychedelics, but unfortunately, I can't really say a lot about this. What I can say, though, when we synchronize our movements, especially with music, because with music it's particularly easy to get a group of individuals synchronizing their movements to the same beat and therefore with each other, is that, of course, also our brain waves kind of synchronize because they are active in similar patterns at similar points in time.
Like our brains synchronize with those others who are with us, listening to
yes.
the same music.
Exactly. And it appears that the synchronization of movements, of our physiological activity, of our brain activity, can lead to states of trance and to states that maybe lead to these feelings that some people refer to as spirituality. In my book, I also write about the feeling of spirituality that we might experience when we perceive music together with others and when we perceive social bonding with others to music. Because in these moments, all these social functions that music facilitates come together. We make contact with each other. There's compassion. We align our attention. We swing together not only with our movements, but also with our emotions. There's some kind of social communication. We coordinate our movements. All these social functions lead to us becoming a social group. Scientifically, we speak of social coherence. We become, or let's say we perceive communion, but not in the religious sense, in the sense that we experience unity in the group. And this can be so strong that we have this special feeling that I refer to as spirituality. It goes beyond the moment because we experience I'm part of something that's bigger than us. I specifically experienced this myself for example, when I play in a big, good orchestra, in a moment where people really like playing together, and where they like really, where you can feel everybody has this feeling, oh, this is good music. This is how it should be, and everybody's engaging in this way. Can also be in chamber music moments. Many people know it from, playing rock bands or dancing on the club floor.
You kind of lose yourself.
Yes, exactly. In this moment of being part, in this moment of unity. If I were alone on the dance floor, this would not happen. Yeah, if we're playing my violin alone in the concert hall, there might be very huge, great moments happen, but not this one. Yeah, it's this moment of spirituality. Yeah, of the experience of God, if you will, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of being part of something bigger. And this bigger usually is being part of a union, of a tribe, of a community.
And I've experienced what you're describing, maybe to lesser degrees or just in different contexts. And it's so powerful. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode was kind of to learn and to help audience members learn, how do you tap into some of these underlying processes in order to not just feel that once every blue moon when you're in a situation that lends itself well to that. And I think you've done a good job of showing how you can be more intentional about engaging in some of these experiences, whether it is alone, meditating with music in a specific way, having these playlists ready, or maybe going to more concerts or listening to music in more communal settings, or learning an instrument. And I think what I've gained is a lot of intentionality.
It's, for me, as a music and brain scientist, there's an interesting question arising here, and that is, are these moments of spirituality with music, are they therapeutic? And can we measure it? And to investigate this, for example, I've set up a study here at my home university in Bergen about Alzheimer. And whether, the question of can we slow down brain degeneration with such feelings? Because there's this notion that when music evokes this sense of social connection and the happiness associated with it, the feeling of being moved, the feeling of being touched, it probably happens exactly in this brain structure, the anterior hippocampus, where the brain degeneration in patients with Alzheimer's and those that, let's say, the pre-stages of Alzheimer are. So it begins. So in that brain structure, the neurodegeneration begins in this condition. And in our research project, what we do is that we sing together once a week in our memory choir. The patients also get a music therapy hour every week, a one-on-one session with a music therapist where they learn the songs that we sing in the choir, and they have some breathing exercises, and they can also just talk a little. And then we sing once a week in our memory choir. We sing together. We sing new songs because, weirdly, Alzheimer patients, even though they might not recognize their own sister anymore, still can recognize music and sometimes even learn new music. So we learn new songs, but we also sing songs that everybody knows, that everybody might have listened when they were riding the bus way back then when they were teenagers. And these are very touching and moving moments. Being part of this group and singing together, these are often moments of tears, because this feeling of unity and social community and connection is stronger than, let's say, in the more typical life context. Many of these patients were very important figures during their occupational career. There were a boss here, a doctor there, a university professor, what have you. Yeah. Some were, more important, quote unquote, in their occupational life than others, and thought they, you know, they were big shots. But here, when we sing together in the choir with people having Alzheimer, we're all the same. We all, because the patients, they all want the same. They want to get better, and they want to make social connections. All what seemed so important in the decades before suddenly is completely irrelevant. What's relevant now is being human and making human connections with other humans. That's what counts now. And that's what we do when we sing together. And in our brain data, we see amazing effects in the brains of our participants. In the left hippocampus, it seems that the neurodegeneration over the course of 1 year is basically halted, which is sensational. If we can,
Wow.
if we can actually, we're still analyzing the data, but if that is actually our final result, that will be phenomenal.
That's incredible. I mean, there's so many elements. There's so many ways in which music can be used as therapy for many different diseases and disorders that you go through in the book, and it's truly remarkable. The last question I have for you is I have my best friend. He doesn't really listen to music, and he's tried, and he said, I've never experienced what most people experience when they describe something like I described on the bus, or maybe a little bit less dramatic than what I described on the bus, but that music doesn't really elicit much emotion in them. And I imagine that part of it is innate, that there are certain people whose neurons, maybe they have more neural connections that are related to music, and some people don't.
We
There's
don't
an
really know
inherent
yet.
nature to it. We don't know.
We don't know.
What?
It's a debated issue. Some colleagues say it's something related to like it's inborn, and some say it's somehow acquired, but we don't know quite. We don't really know yet. But it's true. There are a few people. It's like, let's say 1 or 2 out of 100, which is just a handful out of 1,000. They say, like, I know that others get great pleasure out of music, get goosebumps, tears, excited, etc. For me, I don't really know why. It doesn't do the trick. I have other things: sports, gardening, cooking, television shows, sex, etc. That provides me with pleasure, but music, I can't really figure out what they like so much. And as long as that is the case, I mean, that's fine. Not everybody needs to needs to tap into the beneficial healing effects of music. Other activities can have healing effects as well. However, if somebody says, well, I don't have pleasure to music, neither do I have pleasure when it comes to food, gardening, and other activities in life, then that's a sign where you should, let a doctor check this up, and it may be that you, for example, have a tendency to depression, or that you have depression.
Do you believe that those people, let's say where it's just an isolated thing where they get pleasure from other things, but music just doesn't really hit them, is that the kind of thing where you believe practice and listening to music more, if there's a desire, obviously, because some people might say I have no desire to experience that, but there's a desire, well, yeah, you can train your brain like you described and maybe develop a greater connection to music such that it does elicit those emotional responses that other people get?
Well, but why? I mean, if they don't have, if they say, well, I don't really see the reason, and I don't really feel motivated to do so, I think that's perfectly fine. It's not a deficit or anything. So there's no need to do anything about it. If they say, well, I'm curious what it is, and I'm going to try listening to music a little bit more, then there's a good chance that there's a certain risk that they start liking music. But
I guess that's what I'm asking. I'm asking, is it something that at an older age, when maybe our brains have a little bit less neuroplasticity, is there still benefit for the person who says, no, I kind of want to see what music is like? is there an age where it's kind of too late because your brain isn't as neuroplastic, or is that ability for your brain to connect, to create new neural connections,
Well,
kind of always still there?
Well, our brain can learn until the very last breath. And the millions of neurons that form every hour we engage in a task and learn something new, that's also something that we can keep up until the very last breath. It's certainly correct that at younger age, during the first 10, 15, 18, 20, 21 years, when our brain develops more strongly, that of course there's the plasticity of the brain is greatest and strongest. And that's also why for many things it's easiest to make great progress during those years of one's life. But clearly, you can also learn new things in other stages of your life. Those who say, well, I don't really know what it's all about, but I want to see and I want to experience what it is, maybe start with dancing, because there you have this like entry window where you also move together with others, and that's something that people usually find very pleasurable.
Well, Stefan, I've learned so much from your book and from talking with you. A couple of the things that stand out to me are, one, like I said, just being more intentional about it. And you've outlined that kind of ways you can actually create playlists or think about incorporating music in your life, not just having it as a passive thing that you listen to on the radio or on your phone when you're in the middle of doing something else. That element of intentionality. And also, you've inspired me and maybe others to kind of learn new skills. Just when you said millions of new synapses can be created in an hour, that really, really just outlines quite clearly the power of our brains, repetition, and it, to me, gives me motivation to practice new things that I thought, well, I don't know if I have that in me. But to just hear that millions of neurons are being created each hour, and to get the science behind what's going on when you're doing something, to me is a really powerful thing. So thank you so much. There's so many messages that can be taken out, not just about music, but about life and how our brains work and our ability to stay motivated to learn new things.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a big pleasure to talk to you, Zale.
I encourage people to get Stefan Koelsch's book, Good Vibrations, Unlocking the Healing Power of Music. I'm going to put it in, all our episodes are on YouTube now, so I'm putting it on YouTube. I'm trying to get into the screen here. Good Vibrations, you can look it up on Google. I'll put it in the episode notes. Stefan, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it.
I wish good vibrations to everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.